Welcome to the importance and power of reading. I'm Michelle, the computer lady, your host. During some awful dark times in America, Black people were denied the ability to read, to learn how to read, to write, or to even own books. And that has hampered our communities up until this day. Now we're going to have important conversations about the importance and power of reading. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle, the computer lady. Thank you so much for joining me for this segment on the importance and power of reading. Today, I have a very dynamic guest. I have Pastor Jeff with me. Pastor Jeff is an amazing man. I had the pleasure of just having conversations with him, and I said, I have to have him on here because he's doing some awesome things, not only in his personal life, but in our communities. Pastor Jeff, how are you doing today?
I'm super fantastic, Michelle. How are you? And thank you up front for inviting me to this important conversation.
Well, thank you so much. Now, Pastor Jeff, would you tell everybody about you, where you live, and some things that so they can get to know you?
I currently live in Augusta, Georgia, the hometown of the late godfather of soul, Mr. James Brown, who says, "It's a man's world, but it ain't nothing without a woman." And this is National Women's History Month. So wanted to make sure I got that in. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, born in Knoxville, Tennessee. Joined the military when I was 16, went on active duty at 17, traveled the world, 20 years active duty. Then I did another 18 as a contractor traveling the world. I've pastored all around the world during my time frame in the military. I'm a property investor. I'm a pastor. I'm a farmer. I own several businesses. And my main purpose, I was born to inspire. So I inspire others to move from the mindset of a victim, having been a victim once in my life, to the mind shift of a victor.
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. So not only you're a pastor, you're multi-talented, you're a farmer, and you're an entrepreneur on top of it. You own businesses. That is absolutely amazing. And that was one of the things that attracted me to you. And I had to have you on this program. Now, I got a couple of questions to ask you. And as you know, and you're a pastor and you taught all over the world. You know the importance and power of reading. So my first question to ask you, did you like reading as a child? And if not, did you struggle? And if you struggled, how did you overcome it?
Michelle, that's an interesting question. And the answer to it is I didn't begin to like reading until junior high school. Uh, and I did struggle because my primary modality of learning is auditory. And so the spelling I didn't do well with because I couldn't see it in my head to spell it. And I would have to hear the word in my mind. And I had to come up with a way for myself to be able to remember it. So I wasn't that great of a speller, but I was a writer. I enjoyed writing, I was creative. And so in junior high school, before junior high school, I loved books, even though I didn't read. Isn't that crazy? So I joined those book clubs where you get 10 books for $1 or 10 books for whatever it was back then in those days. And I would just keep buying them and collect them and look at them, but I wasn't reading them. And then I think I had a limiting belief of the big novels and the autobiographies were so big and so thick. That was just, I couldn't sit down and focus that long. And in that book club, I ordered Muhammad Ali's The Greatest. I can still remember it had a yellowish color, and I decided I was going to read that book. It was a challenge to myself. I had never read a book that thick before, and we were poor, so I couldn't afford comic books, and I really didn't like comics. I was a thinker when I was growing up, and so comic books were I mean, they were a good source of reading, and I would encourage parents now, if that's what your child wants to read, let them read the comic books. But to me, comic books weren't serious, so it wasn't something I considered reading. And
Wow,
then,
that's an amazing story. So, did you read as a child? I mean, did you start reading as a child? Did you read like little books?
just the little books they would have you read in school. But I don't remember. I don't have a memory of reading a lot of books. Dr. Seuss, we had the Dr. Seuss books, so we read those. But I can't say that I had an affinity for reading. I can't say that I liked reading. I can't say, as I've heard, my wife says that she read a lot of science fiction and novels, and she could travel the world in the book. I didn't have that experience.
Wow. So now that you're reading and you're a reader, who were your major influencers on this reading journey? Was it mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, a mentor maybe?
No, it actually was just me evolving. And once I read the book Muhammad Ali's The Greatest, I realized that I could read and that I could get through what I considered to be a large book. And because I'm an empath, as I read his book, it ignited my emotions. And so I found myself crying, I found myself laughing, and I couldn't put it down. I made myself sit and focus because I couldn't wait to get to the next chapter to find out what Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, was going to do, what he was going to say. And that sparked my interest in reading books. And then as I went to high school, I wrote, as I said, so I wrote for the school newspaper, and I took a class in literature, and so I began to write, and then I would read because I was writing, but I really, really didn't get into constantly reading until I started college. So when I started working toward my undergraduate degree and went from the junior college to the 4-year university, reading was mandatory. And as I began to read some of the mandatory books, I remember I had to read Who Moved My Cheese, and it it was a small book, but the idea was revolutionary. Um, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That was another book that moved my emotions. How this man in a concentration camp, after losing parts of his family and being separated, how he had the tenacity to keep a positive attitude amidst all of the negativity that was going on, and his friends going off on the trains and not coming back. And then how what we would call fate, what I would call God's intervention, would have him at the right place at the right time with the right guard so that his life was spared and he was able to write Man's Search for Me.
Wow, that is amazing. So, can you tell us some of your favorite books as a young person, as a child, and then your favorite books now, and some of the things that you're reading to make some recommendations to us, please?
Okay, well, as a child, again, by far, hands down, it was Muhammad Ali's I'm the Greatest. As an adult, Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Um, I'm reading now currently. I just finished The Year of Yes by Chandra Rhimes, Blue Fishing by Steve Sims, uh, The Hidden Message of Water, a fascinating book by Dr. M. Imuto, and his research with water freezing it and the water crystals, and how they changed formation based off of the words that were said to them or the labels that were placed on them. So I read a lot of mindful books. Read a lot of books that I like documentaries. I read the book Harriet Tubman's book, and then I watch a lot of documentaries. And then the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Black Hebrews, volume number 2 by Gert Muller. And so those are the types of books that I like to read. Dr. James, I forget his first name, Stolen Legacies is another one of my favorite adult books. You know, Stolen Legacies for melanated, those people who are melanated. It's definitely a book that you want to read. It's not a large read, and there's 2 versions. There's one with a lot of illustrations, and then there's one for the academic. You just want the facts, and he writes it from a empirical perspective. So it's not his opinion; it's his research.
Wow, that is amazing. And those are some great reads. So to the young people out there, as you can see, as we explore this reading journey, there's so much information that you can get. There's so much knowledge, because not only is he reading biographies, but he's also reading books on entrepreneurship, Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So he moves in the direction of his entrepreneurship, of him owning a business. So some great suggestions. Thank you so much, Pastor Jeff. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back as we continue our discussion with Pastor Jeff as we explore the topic, the importance and power of reading. Stay tuned.
Are you a company, business, or service that believes in social responsibility? Would you like to make a positive impact? You can. You can sponsor this program and be seen by 2 million viewers on the PIC TV network. Call 770-367-1268 for more information today.
Hi, folks. Thank you so much. As we continue on this journey about the importance and power of reading, today I have a phenomenal guest, Pastor Jeff. He's from, as he says, the hometown of the late, great Godfather of Soul, James Brown in Augusta, Georgia. He's a farmer, an entrepreneur, and he does so many great things. Pastor Jeff, thank you so much for joining us again. Now, I have some additional questions. As both an educator and a professional, because you're a minister, and I know that people might not think of ministers as educators, but they are, because the word involves action. So how has reading helped your career, and in what ways can you share that with us?
Well, from my career in the military, I was a satellite engineer. I also did what we call frequency spectrum management. All of that requires reading, research, being able to comprehend what you read, and then being able to apply what you read in order to accomplish the mission. And so it was a necessity in my military career as a pastor. I don't think you're going to be an effective pastor or an effective teacher without reading. You have to constantly feed your brain new information. And the way you feed your brain that information, one of the primary ways is to read. Right? And so it has enabled me to be as versatile as I've shared. Because if you don't know something, you can pick a book up and read it. And the Bible, and I just have to say this because I'm a pastor, but the Bible is such a fascinating book that I recommend everybody read, but not from a religious perspective, Michelle, and understand that it's a compilation of letters, right? So it doesn't read like your novel, doesn't read like your sci-fi, doesn't read like a biography. It's a compilation, and it's not in chronological order. And one of the things that I've learned over time, and why I am such an advocate of pushing the Bible, is that, as you spoke in your introduction of the days when it was illegal for people of color or melanated people to be able to read, and people like Frederick Douglass had to hide the fact that he was able to read, is our history, the history of melanated people, long before Europe was a Europe, is in the Bible. The issue is that if you don't read enough and read outside of the Bible, then you read over the history and you don't know that it's your history. So those genealogies for my folks who like who read the Bible, and in the book of Genesis that skip over so and so begot so and so, and so and so begot so and so, and so and so begot so and so. That's a historical genealogy that we can trace from today all the way back to the beginning of time, and see that during those time frames, those were melanated people.
Wow. Now, I love the fact that the historical context in which you put the Bible in, and you explained that the Bible is not, it is not in order. Because a lot of people get that confused. They think it's, step by step, and that we
Right.
know that that's not the case, because there are even books that are missing from the Bible.
Yes.
Right. Now,
But let me say this,
ask you,
Michelle, really quick, if you don't mind.
sure.
We say books of the Bible, and I want all of our readers, and especially the young people, to understand they weren't books. They were letters. That's what they all that we read in it, they were letters and accounts of the history. And so we get to hear, and those that can visualize can picture what was going on in that culture, in that time, in that frame. But if all we read is the Bible, which, by the way, is still the number one best-selling book of all times. There's no other book that has sold more copies than the Bible. However, we need to use other references along with it to be able to understand it and comprehend what was heard by the people that wrote what they wrote, because they weren't Americans. They hadn't been colonized, and they didn't speak English. Their idioms and parts of speech were different than ours are. Their slang, what we call slang, their slang was different than ours, and it's in there. So young people probably like the Bible's so boring. Well, it has its slang. And then if you don't know, I'm going to give everybody a secret. I need them to lean in. The sexiest book ever is in the Bible, and that's the Songs of Solomon. But it's almost in a code of such. But you talking about romance, you talking about steamy, you talking about hot. Oh, it would make some folks blush if they knew what they was reading, Michelle.
Wow, that's amazing information. Now, I've got a serious question.
Okay.
As a professional and an educator, what do you think about the state of reading among our children and adolescents in the United States? Where do you think we are?
We are at a deficit. We are in a state of emergency. When a 12th grader can graduate from high school and only reads on a 5th grade level, that's a travesty. And we're going to have to change what we're doing. We need to take a look at, and I'm just going to say it, we need to take a look at the Japanese. They start teaching a lot earlier than we do. Our system is wait till a child is 5 or 6 years old, depending on their birthday, before we start them in preschool and kindergarten. That's way too late. You need to start while they're in the womb. When my son was conceived, I began to read to him in the womb. I began to play music for him, classical music, while he was in the womb. And we need to continue that while they're developing, and so that they'll develop a love for books, because a parent, a loving parent, or both parents read to them and allowed them to imagine, allowed them to hear the language. And so I think we're going to have to, part of the homeschool movement, I think, is a wonderful thing. But I think now the churches need to step back up, and as what you're doing, the communities of finding ways now to reintroduce this wonderful means of knowledge, which is reading, to the young
Wow,
people.
I totally agree with you. And Pastor Jeff, Dr. Jeff, because you know you're a doctor of divinity, what I see is there's a disconnect between reading and comprehension. Can you go into that just a little bit? Because a lot of people think just because they're reading, they're comprehending. Can we just talk about that for a brief moment?
Absolutely. And again, I was in my 30s when I really learned what I'm going to call the secret sauce to that. And that is that we all have different modalities of learning. All right. And those modalities are, some people are auditory. Like I'm auditory. If you ask me to close my eyes and imagine Alice in Wonderland, I don't see Alice in Wonderland. So my comprehension, if I'm reading, doesn't come from me picturing it in my brain. So I need someone to teach it to me in my modality, which is auditory. So you have to talk, you have to be descriptive in your talking, and we have to have a dialect back and forth. So I'm so that I make sure that I understand what you're teaching me. Now, for those people who are kinesthetic or hands-on, they may see it, but they don't comprehend it until they put their hands to it. They have to touch it. And so this is the reason why in our school system, when I grew up, it was not required of teachers to take any courses on understanding modalities of learning. And since over 80% of people are visual, the majority of the teachers teach visual students. Well, if you teach visual students or you preach to visual congregants, and that's all, you leave out the auditory people and you leave out the kinesthetic people. So you have an entire group. It's not that they don't comprehend, it's just not being taught in a way that they can comprehend.
Wow. Now that's amazing. Now, Pastor Jeff, as you know, these interviews go quick. We got to take another commercial break.
All right.
We're going to be right back. Oh, and Pastor Jeff is going to keep dropping this knowledge on us as we discuss the importance and power of reading. Stay tuned.
Since 1877, Jackson State University has been training students for a life of service and leadership to impact our global society. Ranked among the best HBCUs in the country, Jackson State University offers 47 undergraduate, 37 master's, 1 specialist, and 13 doctoral degree programs. Whether you're interested in the arts, education, public health, the sciences, or business, we're here to take you from ready to JSU ready. Visit jsums.edu and apply today.
Wow. Pastor Jeff is amazing. He's given us some critical knowledge on being able to help our kids read, also addressing the deficit and the difference between reading and comprehension. Now, Pastor Jeff, you've given us a lot of great wisdom. I've got some additional questions, especially because you have a son. And I know that a lot of times, because you talked about the difference between being a visual and auditory and a hands-on learner. Well, I know that for a lot of young men, they struggle reading, not because they can't or won't, it's because we haven't reached them. How can we get our boys to comprehend and read more and better?
That's a loaded question, Michelle. So, with a bit of experience that I have, my opinion is that first of all, develop a relationship. One of the, I believe, issues in the public school system is that a child would sit in class, a teacher will call on them to read, and if they're not confident in themselves, if they may not be able to pronounce the words correctly, they haven't learned phonetics, then they're embarrassed. And once they're embarrassed once, you're not going to embarrass them again. And so now the mindset is changed from being willing to learn to I'm not going to learn. And if I don't learn, then I'm going to get called on. If I don't get called on, then I won't be embarrassed. And so now they missed the opportunity. So I think we have to build a relationship, find out what the child is interested in, and find material to read that is in line with their interests. And then read along with them, and then have a conversation. All right. You're reading the book. You tell, a lot of parents will tell their child, read this book, but then there's no conversation. The child's all excited. They read the book, or they have a question about something that they read, but then the parent doesn't, or the guardian doesn't engage. And so if the parent is showing that they're really not interested in books, they just want to shove them on you, then the child's not going to be interested. But if the child sees the parent reading and shares some of what they're reading, because they may be reading a thick book that they believe is above the comprehension level of the child, but they can break it down some and say, well, this is what mommy's reading. This is what dad is reading. And what are you reading? So, it's a change. So now the child is excited, and especially our young men, and change this false narrative that being smart is taboo. What I learned is that those who, even in my generation, that they call nerds like me, those folks you see that are successful, and typically the ones who called you nerds are the ones who are, and I don't have anything against a regular 9 to 5, but they're the ones that are working for you or working for someone else that is in the same circles that you are in. So being nerdy pays off. Reading pays off. And one of the ways to really get people off of your back, so to speak, for the young people that are listening, is to be educated. And when you can speak intelligently because you've read and you have knowledge about something because you read, then people begin to respect you. And it will open up doors and put you in circles that you won't get in if you're constantly using slang everywhere you go.
Wow. Pastor Jeff, you said that very succinctly, because what I know is we have what I call now the culture of it's okay to be dumb. It's okay to be stupid. And that's because there's fear. And for me, fear means fictitious explanations altering reality. Mm-hmm. So when people have a fear around it, especially our young boys, and they're told, oh, okay, I'm going to do this to avoid it because I don't want to be ridiculed or I don't want to be laughed at, when in fact, it's just a fear. And if we can reach them in a moment of struggle, we can help deter that type of activity.
I agree with you 100%. And I think if we understand, was I think what happens, we become mature and become adults, and sometimes we forget what it felt like when we were teenagers. We forget what that peer pressure was like. And so do not negate the peer pressure. You can read and promote reading in a different atmosphere. So if the child likes to golf, you get a book on golf. They like to fish, get a book on fishing. Find some famous people. And get them hungry for knowledge. And when they get hungry for knowledge, I'm a life learner. I just graduated in December with a degree in golf course management. Now, I'm not going to work in the golf course. I had a certificate in golf course as a golf course technician. I'm not going to work on a golf course. However, I learned a lot of information, and some of that was applicable to the farming. So if we're exercising our brain and we let our young people know, look, I know you're not thinking about when you get old. I know that's way too far ahead, but do yourself a favor now while you're young and help prevent your brain from going into Alzheimer's and dementia by constantly exercising. They say neuroplasticity, which is rewiring your brain. And the more we rewire it, the longer that we're going to live. And how do we rewire it? By taking in new information. So I think we have to connect with a relationship first. And through that relationship, then find books. Like I was saying, I read John Lewis' books, Carry On, by John Lewis and Andrew Young. And I learned some things that I didn't know about the civil rights movement. You know, we're never too old to learn.
So with your son, and I don't know how many children do you have, Pastor Jeff?
I have 3 sons. One's deceased, and one lives here in Augusta, and one lives in Atlanta.
Okay, so you have 3 sons. So you modeled for them reading. They saw you reading, and they engaged with you because they saw you. Am I correct?
They did. However, let me explain something. So because I'm auditory, I do the majority of my books through auditory books. So
you do audiobooks.
I do audiobooks. Now, when I get an audiobook that I know will be beneficial to me or I want to use in training, I'll buy the hardcover or the paperback so that I'll have that tangible reference and resource. So I have several books that I have both Audible and the paperback or the hardback. And so they would hear, I mean, even my wife, when we traveled, we had this rule. Whoever was traveling controlled the radio. So when I was traveling, I was playing audiobooks. So they got to hear the books whenever we traveled.
Well, that's amazing because they were still getting information.
Right.
The other thing is, and this is another question, what guidance would you give the parents or caretakers or guardians of both boys and girls to help them read more and better on this journey?
That's simple. The parent has to model. So if the parent's not excited about reading, the parent is not excited about books, then you can't expect the child to be, unless the book is the child's escape from the toxicity of the family dynamics. That child, then the books become their escape. It's their world out of their world. In what we're going to say, and I don't want to use the word normal, but in a non-toxic family environment, the parent has to get excited about reading. And if you weren't a reader, become a reader. Find out what books you like. You're interested in something. And let your child see you reading and then share that with them. But a lot of parents are still affected by their limited beliefs as a child when they were told they weren't a good reader. They weren't a good speller. They weren't a good student. You're a D student at best. You're not college material. My high school counselor told me I wasn't college material. No, I didn't listen to him, but he didn't help me get into college. He didn't help me get the grants that were available in the 70s for people who were in my condition. Didn't help because he determined that I wasn't college material.
Wow. And these are the things, and this is one of the reasons I want to bring this up, because there's a young man out there right now that's probably struggling with the same thing. And it's not that he can't learn. It's not that he wouldn't be able to read. It's because somebody spoke something negative over his life and he took that in. So thank you so much for Pastor Jeff for bringing that up. Now, Pastor Jeff, you're also a farmer, and I want to talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And as a farmer, how can we teach our children, or how can we engage our children in STEM? Because we know STEM is not only now, but it's the future. How can we engage and teach them and give them the thirst for learning STEM while also reading?
If I can reframe it, and not as a farmer, just as a human being and as a parent, now a grandparent and great-grandparent, the way to involve our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren in STEM is to make it fun. So you cannot go through an entire day without using STEM. When you get up and make your bed up, that's geometry. So when you're making it and you're doing, if you do military corners, those are right angles and 90-degree angles. So that's your math right there. So make it fun. As the child is making the bed up, teach him that that's math. When you go into the kitchen and cook, that's science and math. So while you're fixing those pancakes, you have to measure. You're mixing ingredients together. That's chemistry. So when the parent identifies what STEM is outside of what they dreaded in school, and you can see it when you get into the car. Or matter of fact, let's just, before you get into the car, when they pick up, because they're doing this now before they can talk, they're picking up the smartphone and the tablets. That's science. That's STEM. That takes mathematics. That takes chemistry. That takes engineering. So teach them with the things that they use. And again, when parents become excited, the children will be excited too. I'm gonna tell you a very quick story. Michelle, my dad did not like cats. So when I got to be an adult, we never had any cats. My dad just voiced the opinion that he didn't like cats. Well, my dad was my superhero until he wasn't my superhero. And as an adult, somebody asked me, well, do you like cats, Jeff? Well, actually, they called me Moffett then in the military. They call you by your last name. Do you like cats, Moffett? No, I don't like no cats. Why did I like cats? And then because I processed stuff, I went back and I thought about it. The question was, do you like cats? I said, no, I don't like cats. Well, how do you know you don't like cats? You never had a cat. Yeah, I never had a cat. So I don't know if I like cats or not. It come to find out, I do like cats. But notice what happened. It's because my father didn't like them. We never had any. So immediately, no, I don't like them because my dad didn't like them. I loved my dad, so I don't like them either. Steve Harvey tells a story very quickly of fleas. Fleas, when they're born, can have a vertical of about 36 inches. All right. So that's just how high they can jump. But if you take the fleas and you put them in a jar, they will adapt to the environment. Somebody need to be listening to what I'm saying. They're going to adapt to the environment and they're going to learn to jump just below the top of that jar. When they have children that are in that same environment, Michelle, those children are born with the ability to jump 36 inches, but they never see their parents jump 36 inches. Their parents always jump just before the top. So that's all that they're going to do. It's not they don't have the ability, it's the environment that they are in. We need to tell our children that they can do anything. They can do more than we can do. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. If you're reading with your child and you read a word you don't know, that's a learning moment for you and for the child. Show the child that you're not ashamed to admit that you don't know something. Pastor Jeff don't know everything. I get called doctor a lot, but I don't know everything. And I'm not afraid to say, if you ask me a question, Michelle, that I don't know, I'm going to say, you know what, Michelle, I don't know. But what the military taught me was I know or will find the resource so that I can get the answer. And with that, Google and Google Scholar. Some of Google we need to leave alone. But we want real empirical data. We can go to Google Scholar and find creditable information that's done from empirical research. And so parents has got to get excited.
I know that is absolutely correct. And we do have to get excited. Now, on that note, as a parent of children and a grandparent now and a great-grandparent, how do you make sure that the children that you are involved in, and even in your congregation, how do you make sure that they're reading well and they're comprehending?
Well, what I did when we were meeting in person, because of that stuff that went on, we weren't able to meet in person. But when we were meeting in person, what I did with my teenagers is I engaged them once a week in the game Cash Flow. You have to read the cards in Cash Flow. So there was reading. Then you're simulating business. You're simulating getting out of the rat race of a 9 to 5. And I will never forget, and I'll use this story as I have a set of twins, gentlemen. And one of the twins, because of the way the game went, he kept having children and he couldn't get out the rat race. He kept paying child support. And it implanted on his brain that from that game, that no, I ain't getting I'm not having no children before I get married, because I need to hold on to some of my money. And so I like to find innovative ways to engage the children as well as to engage the parents.
Wow, that is absolutely awesome. Now, how important is it for parents and caregivers to have books in the home for children to access? Do you think it's important to know?
It's super important. I mean, if they're surrounded by books, there's a good chance that one day, even without the parents modeling, they'll pick a book up and read it. As I shared in the opening, I love books. I ordered them. I had, as we would say in the old days, I had oodles and oodles of books. Okay. It's just that I wasn't reading them, or I would read a part of it. It didn't engage my mind, and I'd put it up. It was boring to me, so it didn't move my emotions. But once I got a hold of a book that moved my emotions, I couldn't put it down. And it's still the same way. Today, I will go through material because I need to know it. But for me, a book for me to really, really enjoy is a book that's going to move my emotions. It's going to move me spiritually. It's going to move me emotionally, where I'm crying. I'm relating to the characters that are in the book, and it's going to have me laughing, because laughing is good for our health.
That is absolutely true. Pastor Jeff, you have been an amazing guest, and you have given us so much wisdom today to pass on, not only for today, but for our generations. I want to take this time to thank you for coming on this segment and exploring with us and telling us about the importance and power of reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I have had a wonderful time. And in the words of Les Brown, it has been my plum-pleasing pleasure, Michelle, to share with you all today.
Thank you so much. Now, everybody, as you can see, there's so many different ways that we can engage our children and engage ourselves in the joy of reading. There is importance there and there's power because it elevated us from slavery to where we are today. And we keep elevating and rising. I'll see you on the next segment of the importance and power of reading. Thank you for joining me.
Have you been wondering why our kids' reading scores are failing? Why our kids aren't reading as well as they should? Come join me for my new segment, The Importance and Power of Reading, as we do a deep dive with my special guest,
Shay Miles from the Greenwood District, Tulsa, Oklahoma,
see you there soon.
on the PIC TV network, channel 1000.